today is a July reading wrap-up. I loved Abby Jiminez, last of Elin Hilderbrand's books. Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back. Welcome if you're new here. My name is Sarah Jane and I am a PR practitioner living in DC. I make all types of content about reading, writing, and life in DC. So if that interests you, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe because it really helps support my channel. Alright, today is a July reading wrap-up. I read 7 books in the month of July, which is about pretty standard for me. I read anywhere between 6 to 7 books, so I was really happy with how this month kind of went. And something that was kind of new this month is I actually started a reading journal, which I've never done before, but I was just kind of in like a journaling mood this summer, and so I decided to kind of document some of my ideas while I was reading into this book. I tried to keep most of my summer reads a little bit on the lighter side. I was at the beach, you know, I'm at the pool. I'm trying just not to read too many fantasy. So most of my books this month are like mostly beachy reads with like a couple thrillers here or there. So let's go ahead and get into it. The first book I read is The Last Mrs. Parrish by Constantine. So honestly, this book reminded me a lot of The Housemaid's premise. So if you like that book, they're kind of similar. This is the first book in a series. We're following Amber Patterson, who she comes from a background that's struggling a little bit more, and she is tired of kind of not having the financial means to sort of support this lifestyle that she wants to have. So she decides to target a man who she thinks can support that set of lifestyle and get the man and the wife to break up, and she does this by befriending the wife. So you're kind of on this roller coaster because you're seeing it from like the wife's perspective and also Amber's perspective, so it was kind of interesting. I will say that I think if you like The Housemaid, or if you like this kind of premise, I think The Housemaid was better than The Last Mrs. Parrish. I think The Housemaid was just written a little bit, like I like the story a little bit more. I thought it was a little bit more catching, but I love Liv Constantine. I read many of her books. So anyways, I did enjoy this book. I gave it 3 stars. Next up, I read some Abby Jiminez's books. So the Part of Your World series, you're supposed to read Part of Your World, Yours Truly, and Just for the Summer. Technically, they can be read as standalones. You don't have to read them in that order, but if you do read them in that order, you pick up on like little eggs throughout the rest of the books. I did not read them in that order because like I was reading them from my iPad, and what was available at the library was Yours Truly, then Just for the Summer, and then I just finished Part of Your World. So I read them out of order, but for the sake of this video, I'm gonna talk about them in order. So starting with Part of Your World, which is book number 1. So in this book, we're following Daniel, Grant, and Alexis Montgomery. Alexis is a doctor who's kind of taken on this sort of family legacy in the hospital system, and her brother has like upped and, you know, went off and got married, and so it really just leaves her, and she feels a lot of pressure from her family to kind of like live out this legacy that they've put before her. She meets Daniel, who is from a town 2 hours away, and Daniel is a carpenter who also owns an inn, and he just provides a level of comfort and familiarity to her that she just doesn't experience in her life. And so it starts off as a fling and it becomes more than that, and the whole book is essentially about their relationship and how it progresses and how they deal with some of these things like, you know, classism and societal norms and like what is appropriate. And I loved this book. I think this book handled all of these sort of themes very well. I just loved Abby Jiminez and the world that she created. I read this book so fast and I gave it 5 stars. The second book in the series, which was also the first book I read, is Yours Truly. So in this book, we're following Brianna, who is actually Alexis's best friend from the book. So it's all kind of the same universe. We're just going to a different character. So in the same hospital system that Alexis was a part of, Brianna's also a doctor. And Brianna is kind of, she's very ambitious. She has this specific chief position that she wants. And as she goes up for it, a new doctor comes into the system and she thinks that he is trying to take that promotion away from her. So immediately she already doesn't like him. She's like, you are standing in the way of my life goal. And his name is Jacob Maddox. And Of all the books, Jacob Maddox was my favorite character. He is someone who has social anxiety, so he isn't really good about, you know, making first impressions, having kind of direct conversation with someone. So in his attempt to try to like smooth things over with Brianna, because she obviously sees him as a threat, he writes her a letter, and so they begin to write letters to one another, which I love. I think writing letters is such a lost art. He is also like he's like a botanist. He loves to grow plants, and like, I don't know, there was just so much about him. He was an amazing, like, pure character. And there's this whole other subplot where he also donates his kidney to Brianna's brother. So I mean, I just thought this was such a wonderful, wholesome book, and I think of the series, this one tied with the first one. I think I love this one just a smidge more than the first one, but I think this one's my favorite one in the series, and I also gave this one 5 stars. Some of my favorite quotes from this book were, "You can't spell disappointment without men." If you're with someone who doesn't speak your language, you'll spend a lifetime having to translate your soul. If she sets a boundary, respect it. But if you ask her if you can show up and she says yes, show up. I live by that quote, by the way. Love that quote. Another quote, quote 5 that I love from this book is, "If he's not dramatic, he dies." And then quote 6, and my last favorite quote from this book was, "When she ghosts me, she haunts me," which like cut me in here. I'm also really glad I had some 5-star reads this month, because I didn't have really any last month, so I really needed a good 5-star read. And last in the series was Just for the Summer. So this book just came out earlier this year, and obviously I'm new to the Abby Jimenez world, but I immediately dived right in. So this one is connected with the rest of the world that we've been a part of, but it's a little bit different. You don't really find out until later. But essentially we're following 2 characters. We're following Justin and we're following Emma. Essentially they both have this kind of curse. Whenever they date someone, the person that they end up once they break up, that person then finds their like soulmate. So they think to themselves, if we just date each other, the curse will then just cancel itself out. What could possibly go wrong? Turns out that that wasn't quite what happened, and it's sort of like this story about how, you know, they have their own sort of challenges that with their life and their personalities that they kind of like work to overcome. And at the end there's just this huge reveal that was really sweet, that made me really wish that I had read the books in order. Of the books, this one was kind of my least favorite. I actually gave it 3 stars. A couple things that I didn't love about this book versus the other books, I felt like this one was more insta-lovey, which is a trope that I'm not really that big of a fan in, and I just kind of wish that there had been a little bit more build up between the 2 characters. I did think there were parts of this book that were really funny. Like there was a lake scene with an inflatable and paddling, and it was really funny. So there are definitely parts of this book that were comical. And something that I do like about Abby Jimenez's universe in general is that she always focuses on some sort of serious issue. So in this particular book, you know, in Yours Truly, we focused on someone with social anxiety. And this book, we focused on someone who has some PTSD and childhood trauma, and how the effects it has on an adult if it's left untreated. So I did overall love that. The tropes in this book were online meet cute, insta-lovey, and found family. Some of my favorite quotes from this book were, "Maybe home isn't a place, maybe it's a person." I loved that quote. Another quote was, "Not everything that comes out of a crisis is bad. Sometimes your traumas are the reason you know how to help." Oh my gosh, that was deep. Another quote I really liked is, "You're in a different place than I am." And he said, "Then meet me where I am." That's good. And the last quote I liked from this book was, "I did what I was good at. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and I put a system in place." And I felt that because I'm a person who needs systems, and I can do things when I have systems. Okay, now that I've kind of wrapped up the Abby Jimenez world for a couple minutes there. So I read that entire series this month, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for a good beach read that's just light. I loved this whole series, so I highly recommend it. Next up, my mother-in-law let me have this book that she was reading. It's Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. So I've heard of this book before, and a lot of people seem to really like it, so I just wanted to go ahead and pick it up. This takes place in Canada. We're following Persephone, who essentially during childhood, they get a home on a lake, and every summer they go to the lake with their family, and that's where they're at in the summer. They're there for 6 summers. This book jumps timeline, and you're essentially following the story of Percy and Sam and how they become best friends and eventually something more, and something happens, you don't know what it is, that eventually causes them to kind of like split apart and never talk to each other ever again. It's a cute book. It's a very like coming of age story. Sometimes like the jump between timelines was a little disorienting, but other than that, like I enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars, and I was really surprised to learn that this was Carly's debut novel. Like, that's amazing, because obviously this book has been such a success. So if you're looking once again for a light summer read, I wouldn't call this one as light as Abby Jimenez's books. Like I think those are a little bit lighter, but it's still like a good summer read. I would recommend. My favorite quotes from this book were, "Betrayals don't cancel each other out, they just hurt more." And quote 2 is, "I love you," he said. "I know," I said. "Hurt eyes move across my face." And he said, "You broke my heart." And she said, "I know that too." Another book I read this month is It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. So this is the second book. It is the duology to It Ends With Us, which is out in theaters, starring Blake Lively. I'm going to go see it next week, and I'm super excited because I actually really enjoyed that book, and I love Blake Lively, so perfect world. This is a romance book that takes place in Boston, and essentially we're following kind of where book 1 left off, which is where, I don't want to like give too much away. I feel like I can't talk about it without like saying anything, so if you don't want any spoilers, I would skip ahead a couple minutes. But long story short, Lily has divorced Ryle, and they share custody of their daughter, but she never reported his violent behavior. So when Atlas re-enters her life, they strike up a relationship. Ryle finds out, and he is furious, and then he becomes violent again, to the point where his sister and her husband have to strike an intervention. So that is like a quick summary of the book. So to be clear, I really enjoyed the first book. Even though this book has less violence than the first book, I didn't like it as much. I'm really glad that the author went back and gave our protagonist a happy ever after. I think that's like great, and like Lily obviously deserves that, but the conflict buildup didn't feel like it was really there like it did in the first book. And I also thought Ryle was going to have more bursts of retaliation. Like I felt like it was constantly threatening to happen, but it never quite happened. It was a fine read, but it did not move me the way the first book moved me. So overall, I gave this book 3.5 stars. I had 2 favorite quotes from this book. The first one is, "Sometimes people think that if they love a broken person enough, they can be what finally repairs them. But the problem with that is the other person just ends up broken too." And then quote number 2 was, "When you are told you are nothing for years on end by everyone you should have been something too, you start to believe it, and you slowly start to become nothing." I felt like those were both very powerful. Okay, last but certainly not least is Swan Song by Elin Hilderbrand. So this book just came out, and this is the last of Elin Hilderbrand's books. So I think she's still gonna write with her daughter and maybe something here or there, but she has released and published a book every summer for like 20 years, and she said this is the last time that she's going to do that. I did not realize that this was part of a series. It's actually the last book in the Nantucket series, but from what people have told me, you don't have to read all the books. Like you can read them as a standalone, which is what I did. I haven't read any of her other Nantucket books. In this book, we're following Ed Capanash, who is a police officer who is about to retire. He was the chief of police in Nantucket, and as he's about to retire, a girl goes missing, and the girl works for a couple who just moved to the neighborhood. They bought like a $22 million home in Nantucket. So it kind of follows sort of this like web of like how, you know, how this new couple came into the neighborhood, how this girl went missing, who this girl even is, and there's just a lot of like many little storylines going on throughout this book. I unfortunately did not really think this book was for me. I didn't think it was a bad read, but I just felt like there were so many characters and it was kind of confusing for me. And I also got confused because while there are a ton of characters, there's also a lot of timeline jumps, and so I was confused a lot while I was reading this. I think maybe it would have been a little bit bit easier if I was as invested in the characters from book 1 to now, since this is the 4th book. Maybe that would have made it a little bit easier, but as a standalone, it was a little challenging. I did really, though, enjoy that it was taking place in Nantucket. I would say that if you're interested in that kind of vibe, I actually like the Paradise trilogy better from Elin Hilderbrand. So if you're looking for a comparable title, that's what I would recommend. Overall, I gave this one 3.5 stars. So those are all the books that I read in the month of July. Like I said, it was a great reading month for me. I, for the most part, loved every book that I read, and everything was light. It wasn't too hard to read, and like, 'cause to me, that's what reading is in the summer. It's like a level of escapism and just enjoying the journey of some of these stories that people have to tell. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. If you're still watching this up to this point, please leave a book emoji in the comment section so I know. Also, let me know in the comments below if you have any summer book recommendations, because I have one more beach trip coming up and there's still quite a bit of sun left in the summer, and I am just looking to fill up my basket with things that are wonderful to read. So anywho, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.